بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Firstly, I say a warm welcome to our viewers. I can't actually see how many of you have joined, but of course, thank you for joining us this evening. And we ask Allah Ta'ala that He keeps us safe, keeps our family safe, and for those who have been afflicted by the COVID illness or just generally with any illness, we ask Allah Ta'ala to grant them shifa. And for those who have sadly passed away, that He forgives them and He showers them with His mercy and His blessings, inshallah. Today, alhamdulillah, we are honored to be joined by Dr. Asim Qureshi, who, a very brief background, he has a legal background in international law, and he's currently the research director at CAGE, which is a local advocacy organization. And he, alhamdulillah, quite aptly, he's authored a couple of books as well. So we have Rules of the Game, A Virtue of Disobedience, and most recently, I Refuse to Condemn. So, yeah, Bismillah, Dr. Asim, how are you?
Assalamu alaikum, alhamdulillah. Very well, Jazakallah khair for having me and for inviting me, and assalamu alaikum to all the viewers today. Inshallah, like you said, I hope everybody's well and trying to stay as safe as possible.
Inshallah. Barakallah feek. Hopefully the event title gave this away, but the topic of today's discussion is the lost art of reading, and why it's important and why it should be something revived, especially for us, all of us here on this call and tuning in, the youth particularly, why it's important. And we received a lot of questions from you guys, alhamdulillah, and they were excellent questions. We will try to get through as many as possible. If we don't get through some, please do forgive us. I've tried to bunch a couple together, which are of the same sort of genre or topic, inshallah. So we should get through all of them. But yeah, so of course, the reason why Dr. Asim is joining us is that in his whole index of qualities, there's one that stands out particularly relevant to this, which is, mashallah, he's an avid reader. And as you can see in the title, that's not a hyperbole. I think it's true. Was it exactly 100 you read, or was it plus or minus?
I mean, alhamdulillah, it's like, around 100, yeah, alhamdulillah.
So over 100, over 100. Okay. I think the immediate response some people have is, maybe they were just thin pamphlets. That's how we got through them. But I think you've assured us every single time you've mentioned it that no. The average novel size is about 200 plus pages. So, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So, inshallah, before we get to the bulk of the discussion, I wanted to do some quick fire questions. Hopefully they're quick fire.
Sure.
So, the first one.
Questions might be quick fire. I can't tell you about the
answers. That's fine. We have time, inshallah. Would you be able to list 4 books that you wish young people would read or would have read? Yeah.
Obviously not including the Quran.
You can include the Quran. Maybe give you a particular benefit as to why you would include.
I mean, I think that, if you're not reading the Quran, there's a problem with your faith in general. It should be like a constant. So that's why I don't like to include the Quran in it, because it's almost like you're making a comparison between the Quran and other books. There is no comparison. You cannot compare the direct speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to anything that any human being has ever written. And so that's why I never really include the Quran in these types of questions when they're asked for me, because of course it's something that is kalam Allah. And so we should make that kind of equivalence with other literature. But if we're talking about literature after that, then there's so many, subhanallah, so many books with so much value. Ibn Qayyim's Invocation to God is a superb book. Like, if you want to increase yourself in your love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your connection to him, to increase your spirituality just generally, it's such a one. In fact, anything that Ibn Qayyim ever wrote, really, just pick it up and read it, because he's, for a start, he's just got an amazing way of phrasing things that should be common sense to us as Muslims, but he has a way of like attaching them to your heart, which is truly, truly like exceptional, in a way that's in a quality that's difficult to describe. So yeah, Ibn Qayyim is definitely like one of my favorite Islamic writers, like full stop. But then, you know, outside of that, I think, you know, a book that everyone should read is the autobiography of Malcolm X. I can't stress enough how many times I've heard people say to me that book changed my life. And what's so interesting about that book is that the amount of content about him being actually Muslim and about his spirituality and his relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very, very small. Like mostly the book is about like all the crimes that he committed, you know, and like the difficulties he had in life, and, you know, kind of like the naughty things he would get up to. But people will still refer to it as a book that changed them fundamentally for the better, and especially in terms of their relationship to the deen, because of the quality of Malcolm's words and because of the way that he speaks them. I mean, Alex Haley helped him to write the book, but, you know, they're really Malcolm's words. And so, you know, Allah yarhamuhu, you know, it's really a wonderful book to read. Now we get into the difficult territory. What other books am I going to add? And I wasn't prepared for this question, actually. So I'm just going to say Alexandre Dumas, one of my favorite authors. He wrote The Count of Monte Cristo, which is, if you're into Prison Break stories, it's a wonderful story about a prison break and revenge. You know, but he also wrote the Three Musketeers, the Three Musketeer books, which are all exceptional. Every single last one of them is actually one of the few accounts that you'll read from somebody who was writing in the 19th century, who's from France, you know, but Alexandre Dumas was black. Most people don't know that about him, where the references to Islam are actually very, very good. They're actually, there's that kind of usual Orientalism or Islamophobia that you expect from that era of literature. You don't actually find it in the Three Musketeers book. So that was always a nice surprise for me. Like it's for that whole generation, whether you read Dostoevsky or you read Victor Hugo or you read any of these authors, right, from that period, you expect some degree of like animosity towards Islam, but actually Dumas doesn't do any of that, which is just, it's always pleasing. So, I mean, anything that Dumas writes basically anyway, if you can learn French and read it in the French, then do that. I haven't done that myself, but, you know, I'm sure it's, from what friends tell me, it's exceptional in its quality of French writing. And I guess I'm going to have to then pick, it's between two books. All right, I'm going to go with Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. It's an unbelievable story about a man who commits murder, but really like captures so intensely the criminal mind and the kind of anxieties that criminals feel when they do something wrong. Yeah, so yeah, those are, I guess, the books that I would initially recommend anyway. Maybe I'll change my mind if you ask me on another day.
I had a feeling you managed to do something like this. You put 5 in 1.
5, did I? Somehow.
With the Three Musketeers.
Okay, well, that's 5 books, so it's even more
exactly.
than that.
Inshallah. So next one. What's your favorite genre?
My favorite genre is I mean, let's talk about fiction, because like when it comes to non-fiction, there's like, you know, it like everything is my favorite. But with fiction, dystopias for sure. I mean, I can say that straight off the bat. You know, like dystopian fiction is my absolute all-time favorite genre of literature. I'll read like adult books. I'll read, you know, YA and even kids books on dystopia.
Okay. And if I'm pushing you, does any one particular title?
I mean, 1984 is emblematic, but I wouldn't recommend that to younger readers. It has a great deal of inappropriate content in it. Yeah, so yeah, just for older readers, really. You can pick up Animal Farm if you're a lot younger, maybe like year 7, year 6, year 7 kind of age.
Okay, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. I've got 3 more.
Sure.
2 more. Let's take 2 more. who is or what is your favorite fictional character?
Oh, this is a really good one. Uh, okay, it's gonna have to be between two, and they're both bad guys, technically. One is Miss Havisham from The Great Expectations. Actually, I'm gonna add three. And yeah, two of them are women, so I don't know what that tells you about me or like my particular penchant for literature. But yeah, the second one is Milady from The Three Musketeers. I mean, both of them are absolutely diabolical. And the third bad guy is Findo Gask from a series called uh, The Word and what's it called again? Yes, The Word and the Void. But it's one of the later books from that series. He's a really good bad guy. Yeah. So yeah, I ended up picking three really terrible people as my favorite fictional characters.
That's fine. I think, okay, alhamdulillah. Final one. This is probably not a quick fire question, but is there any particular reflection you'd share from your 2020 reading that's probably particularly pertinent to a younger audience or a young audience?
2020 reading. Good question. How young are we talking?
Me young, you young. Probably
Yeah,
about
I was
university age, coming up to
university.
university age.
This is a good question. I'm trying to remember what I read now. That's embarrassing. What particular reflection would I take from reading in 2020 of a specific book? You mean?
It could be anything from the reading that stood out. Maybe that's relevant to the situation we're in now. Point of reflection. If you don't mind sharing, maybe something you've shared with your children recently.
Let's come back to this question.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think that's a hard one because yeah, there's just there's so much to talk about. There's a lot.
100 books, more than 100 books. خلاص. Okay, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for entertaining that. There's always a fear. We don't know if the individual is actually going to entertain the quickfire questions or just reject them. Alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair. So I guess it's only apt that we start with a kind of general overview on this topic of reading. From your personal experience and even motivating factors or driving factors that pushed you to reading, why is reading important, especially for youngsters in this day and age? What does it provide that's unique? If that's a place to start.
Sure. So how do we understand the world, right? I think is the question that we're really asking ourselves here. And there are so many different ways of understanding the moment that we live in, the world around us, the society around us, and one of them, of course, is through experience, through the things that we experience ourselves. Another way is to talk to other people, to hear their stories. The thing about talking to other people is that it takes a very, very long time to really get to the heart and to the center of somebody's story when you're speaking to them. You'd have to spend many, many, many hours with that person to really try and come to grips with what their life experiences are. And as an ethnographer, which is really what I do for a living, and for those who don't know what that means, I effectively study human beings as part of my work in trying to understand how they became the person that they did in the legal cases that I work on, right? So you have to take a lot of witness testimonies. You have to, study them in detail. You have to have multiple conversations with them. And this takes, in one case that I'm working on now, I'm in my 11th year of working on that case, and I'm still asking the same family members questions again and again and again, right? This takes a very long time. It's a very laborious process. So what do books do? Books expedite that process for us. They allow us glimpses into different worlds and different stories in different ways, whether it's through autobiographies or if it's through biographies or if it's through novels. All of these different genres and different types of books, they open themselves up in a way that allows us to get a glimpse into something. And some people say, well, that's why obviously nonfiction is so important, because we can really learn facts about the world, or we can read analysis, or we can read books on religion and really kind of understand our religion better in so many ways. But and this is the point that I make about reading in general, that when we secularize knowledge like that, and by that I mean when we separate Islam from the world, so religion from the world, what we do is we say that these two spaces are separate to one another. So when I read a so-called Islamic book, I'm reading it because of worshipping Allah, and when I'm reading a novel, I'm reading it because of personal pleasure, right? So that's how we kind of make these distinct worlds from one another. But actually, it's very, very possible to read an Islamic book and to be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, right? Because sometimes what we do is that we read something and then we don't act upon it, or that we do it out of a sense of arrogance, that we want to show other people that, oh, look how much knowledge I have. And there are all sorts of like different factors that come into reading those like Islamic books, right? So my point is, what are we really talking about here? What we're talking about ultimately is gaining knowledge in ways that are beneficial to us. Of course, there may be other motivations, like you may genuinely, like me, enjoy reading books and get some enjoyment out of like the aesthetic of maybe the way that the words are written, which I do. I really enjoy writing, reading good writing, or a storyline or a good plot twist, right? All of these things can give us joy. But are we connecting the process of that reading to something that's higher, right? And that's where I think we should try and sit as Muslims, as people who are constantly engaging in our niyyah, in our intention towards the things that we read. And the point that I make about fiction that you don't really get from most genres, maybe only from autobiographies, is that through fiction, writers reveal themselves in a way that no other genre does. They will express to you all the loves, the fears, the hates, the desires that they have about the world that they live in. And, they will themselves, open themselves to you in a way that somebody might be shy to if you were to speak to them, right? So they're giving you information here. And as people who care about society and what happens to society, even outside of like our own Muslim brothers and sisters, right? As people who generally care about society in general, we should try to understand them better. It helps to build empathy so that when we approach them, we know how best to approach them. We understand them a little bit better. We understand what motivates them, what makes them tick. And one of the things about the Prophet ﷺ's da'wah is that he really understood the human condition of the people that he was talking to. Like he really understood them intimately. That this is what they need. This is what drives them. This is where their fears lie. This is what motivates them. And when we read fiction, we get a real sense for that in a very, very, very deep and true way. And it's one of the reasons why I like reading dystopias, actually, because with dystopias, people really reveal themselves in a way like, this is what we're really scared about, what will happen to the world, right? If we let the world go in a bad way. And I think that there's something always so fascinating about what you take from that in terms of what writers are identifying as the thing that will eventually tear society apart. So many writers have already written about the moment that we're in right now, and it's always been interesting now to reflect this pandemic and this Trump period and the storming of Capitol Hill now backwards through that dystopian fiction to say, you guys had your finger on the pulse in many ways, and that's interesting in and of itself.
Exactly. Can I just sort of hone in on one point that you just mentioned about dystopias themselves? Do you find that depending on the background of the author, more sort of regional, that dystopias tend to differ Right.
Yeah, of course they do. There's a really, really beautiful book called The Queue by Basma Abdelaziz, originally written in Arabic, but it's been translated into English. Absolutely superb piece of fiction on which effectively is critiquing Sisi's coup of President Morsi's, Allah yarhamuhu, his short period as president of Egypt. But what's really interesting is the way that she incorporates the complicity of the religious establishment within that coup, and how she uses like a central motif, which I won't give away, of this queue leading up to this gate, as like the whole kind of metaphor for what's going on in Egypt right now. So there's always some like really, really clever stuff going on out there that will help you to just think about things in a bit different way. The way she incorporates mobile phones, the way that she incorporates ideas around like ritualized dhikr, right? Like all of these things, they're so clever, but they just help you just to sit back and just think a little bit about the moments that we're in very, very new and innovative ways. So definitely, like depending on where the person's from, you'll definitely get a different sense of what their issues are. Like what I found with Western writers is that they were far more worried. Their dystopias really focused around kind of sexual emancipation, much more so than anything else. They're like a lot of their dystopias like focus around this one thing. So if you take Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, or Brave New World, or 1984, all of them have this kind of central motif alongside other forms of repression too. But when you look at dystopias that come from the East, they much more focus on like freedom of religion, or freedom to speak, or freedom of conscience, right? So the emphasis is much, much different, because their life experience has been different too, and because their culture and their faith put certain things above others in terms of priority of what they perceive freedom to be. So you learn a lot about what people are anxious about in terms of the future from the dystopias they write.
So it's like what you were saying, is essentially reading books is the fast track way to get to know cultures, different people, more so the thinkers of different societies. Yeah, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. So coming on to the I think the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Where did the whole 100-book project come from? Was there like a particular thing that you had this year? I'm going to just go all out. Was there a particular reason behind the initiative?
I mean, I've always read a fair number of books each year. I never catalogued them, so I was probably doing that for the last 20 odd years, easily, probably before that even, but it's not something I really kept a track of. And then I went on to the Goodreads app, and they have this system of like setting yourself a reading challenge. So I think it was in 2016 I first started doing them, and I think it started a little bit late in the year with that one. And so I saw that, oh, right, okay, I had no idea that I was reading like this much, but I was able to share as well. So that was the first year I did it. Then 2017 was a bit of a kind of a annus mirabilis for me in terms of, because I took a sabbatical from my work. So I literally took the year off just to read and write. That's it. That's all I wanted to do. And alhamdulillah, I managed to read like 170 odd books that year. And that was because I had literally nothing else to do with my time, alhamdulillah. I had my paid work that I still needed to get on with. But outside of that, I really dedicated myself to this task of really just focusing on, trying to situate where I'd been, all this time, what I'd been doing for the previous 15 years of my working life. Yeah, and so then, like after that, I just kind of maintained this habit of tracking the books that I was reading, and yeah, it just like kind of, it was normal for it to be around a certain mark, alhamdulillah. And that just comes from having a childhood habit of reading more than anything.
Yeah, yeah, inshallah. There are some questions that actually were shared by the audience relating to this. But just before those, just out of interest, have you ever considered writing in sort of the fiction genre?
So
Or
alhamdulillah, I have now a manuscript for
okay,
a dystopian fiction book, inshallah. So make dua for me.
inshallah.
Yeah, I won't give too much away, but it's based around a hadith, and
Okay,
so I
inshallah.
extrapolated a story from that. So it's it's with my agent right now. It's we'll see what she says. Alhamdulillah, a few teenagers who have read it have given me the thumbs up at least so far.
Mashallah.
But
Mashallah.
we'll see what the publishers say and whatever else. But inshallah, hopefully it'll be something interesting for people.
Inshallah. Can we tease out a time frame? Any idea when we
Oh, I have no idea. I don't even know if it's any good right now. So
okay. Okay, inshallah.
let's wait to hear what other people say first, inshallah. But yeah, it's been something I've been working on for about since September 2018. So just
Okay.
this last December, alhamdulillah, I completed a kind of main draft of the manuscript. It's been through a few changes. I had to change the plot a couple of times. Alhamdulillah, it's there or thereabouts.
Okay. I think we'll keep busy with I Refuse to Condemn for now. But inshallah, that's
Inshallah.
something to look forward to. Inshallah. But in terms of the questions, I think we'll start getting into the questions from the audience now. There was one actually around the reading habit.
Mhm.
So you did just mention that it's a habit that you've maintained from childhood, but a couple of the audience were asking that even if they did have a habit early on, obviously with the whole, you know, technocracy, everything, the whole rise of technology and everything, they lost that habit.
Right.
And a slightly extended question, the whole shift has resulted in a kind of mentality that's very sort of fast-paced.
Mhm.
Everything's instant gratification. There's no attention span. So they're asking, how do you bring this somewhat anachronistic thing of reading
Right.
back into motion? How do you get used to this slow-paced kind of life and
Yeah,
bring that habit
sure.
of reading again?
Jazakallah khair. So, I mean, I want you to understand that my system, my process didn't just like start overnight. Like it's been something that, I've added to, I've revised, I've had to think about over many years. And as I got older, I had to think about it more. When I was younger, when I was 18, um, sleeping kind of 4 hours a night was like nothing for me. Alhamdulillah, I did it all the way up into my, late 20s, early 30s, without really any issue whatsoever. And so I always made time for myself. As I'm now like in my late 30s, it's getting a little bit more difficult to maintain that. But it's about effectively, you know, and I guess this kind of, what I'm going to say really fits in with a wider discourse around how we situate ourselves within all of this modernity of, all of this technology, and how we conceive of the lives that we're living. And so, I noticed that there are a few things that go in tandem with one another. People sometimes say to me, well, I find it very difficult to wake up in the morning, right? And so there are then questions about, okay, fine, well, let's talk about what your eating habits are. Are you eating heavy foods very late at night? Are you eating greasy foods, late in the evening? What time do you finish eating, just generally full stop? Are you eating sweets? Do you have a high sugar intake in your diet? Because when we start thinking about our body, what that has an impact on our sleep. It has an impact on our ability to concentrate. When I gain a little bit of weight, like I'm talking about 1 or 2 kg, it has a huge impact on my lethargy, on my concentration. As soon as I drop my weight down again, alhamdulillah, that concentration massively improves, especially in the mornings. Mornings are my most prized time. And so, what I'm trying to say is that the body is in this kind of like perfect synchrony that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And when we take care of it in certain ways, then we come more attuned. We're fine tuning the machine, which then fine tunes the mind as well. And so I found like not eating heavily at nighttime really has a huge impact for me. That made a massive difference. And like many years ago, alhamdulillah, I started doing that. I also sleep in a cycle rather than at I don't wake up at a certain time. So it's not like I wake up at 5:30 a.m. I wake up between 4:45 and 5:30, because when we sleep in cycles of 45 minutes where we go into a deep sleep, and then we come into a light sleep. So when I wake up in the morning, the app on my phone, because it's monitoring my sleep at night, the alarm goes off when I come out of the deep sleep and into the light sleep. And so when I wake up, I don't wake up with that heaviness that people feel in their head when they feel like they haven't had enough sleep. Like, when you feel like drowsy, it's not because you haven't had enough sleep necessarily, because you could go to sleep for 2 hours and wake up in in the light sleep period and feel very, very awake. What's happened there is that you're waking up at the wrong part of your cycle. And so you feel that drowsiness, which makes you then feel very, very kind of heavy headed as you start your day. So I recommend people, they whatever, even if you need 7 hours sleep, but at the end of that period, wake up within a cycle. Don't wake up, you don't have to be like me and sleep whatever, few hours, right? Whatever it is, because what you'll find is that your attentiveness in the morning will start so much better. You'll feel better about yourself for doing that too. And so, yeah, that's really where the time for reading comes from. And so, as somebody, as a father of three boys who are homeschooled, the morning times in particular become very important for me, because this is a way of me having like absolute quiet. Now, there was a small period where I was getting distracted by my phone in the morning. So I was waking up, I was doing what I normally do, but I wasn't like spending all of my time reading. And it's because my phone was distracting me, or I was distracting myself. I don't want to like put the blame on an inanimate object, right? Like, I'm at fault here. People with addiction should always admit their faults. And so, yeah, at some point you have to admit that I'm finding this thing difficult to just put away. And so I made an intervention in my own life, and I subscribed. It's a very cheap program called Freedom, and it's freedom.to. Can I use the chat function? So it's www.freedom.to. And it goes across my whole system. So it's on my iPhone, it's on my Mac, it's on like these devices that I use. And what it does, it shuts me out of the internet. Right, like I can't use I use the function that means that I can't even switch it off if I desire to. Like, if I like, so that's it. Like, if you need to get in touch with me through the internet in the morning, you're not going to do that. And so I purposely made that decision in my life, because I felt like, okay, this is encroaching on a time period that's very, very important to me, which is my reading time. And because I don't want to be distracted, because nobody else is awake to disturb me, I don't want the internet to disturb me either. And so I block the internet. And it's not just the apps; it's like the whole internet is what I can't even like use a browser in that period of time, and my emails don't even come through. So that then becomes a solid kind of 2.5, 3, sometimes 4 hour block that I'm reading in the morning. And that's where the kind of the training of constantly reading comes in. I can read for very long periods of time, alhamdulillah, without having to take too many breaks or losing my being distracted. I start with Quran. So I do some Quran with some tafsir before I do anything else, like just to center myself to the idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words are more important and more deserving of my time than anything else. And then after that, I'll get onto the main chunk of my reading. So that can differ every single day in terms of its content, the genre, anything. It's just really whatever takes my fancy, unless there's a very, very specific work reason why I need to be reading something specifically that day. It's a very, very random process for me. I'm not going through like one subject and becoming like trying to become an expert on that. I'll shift and jump across different genres and topics regularly to try and give myself a wide base of understanding. So sorry, I know it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but it's very difficult to answer that without explaining that there are so many different elements that go into having that space to think and read for lengthy periods of time without distraction.
I think we should have called the event the art of reading. There's so much more to it.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. Yeah, that's right. But that, of course, it applies to anything. It would apply to like you working at that time of the morning as well, right? Like it's not just the reading, but reading requires a specific concentration, I think.
So with that chunk or that block of reading, do you is it any particular day you're reading one thing, or do you read a couple of things simultaneously in one block?
Yeah, so it's not, I usually have like multiple books that I'm reading at the same time. Never really more than 3, I think. There's one main book that I'll be reading in the morning, but then through the course of the day, there'll be other things that I'm dipping out. Usually those are ones are work related. So the one that I'm reading in the morning, it may be work related. More often than not, it's not. But then, like as I said, throughout the day, because my work requires a lot of reading too, I'll you know, there's a couple of hours here and there throughout the day that in short chunks I'll read something or another.
Yeah, and so with just off of this question, if you find a couple of people asked this one as well, actually, if you find yourself to be either not particularly enjoying the book, or maybe if it's a new subject matter, not really sort of clicking with it, do you just commit to finishing it, or is it a thing of?
I personally commit to finishing it. I don't suggest that for everyone. And especially if you're already struggling to get into reading, then probably it's best not to at this stage of your reading journey to carry on with the book. The only reason why I do commit to it is because of an experience that I had reading Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure, which is it's a bit of a beast of a book. And I was reading and I was thoroughly bored. Like literally, I'm talking about 3/4 of this book are just absolutely astonishingly mind-numbingly boring. And I like Thomas Hardy. I think he's a great writer, and I just think that book was particularly terrible. But about 3/4 of the way through the book, he writes this one sentence which is so good, and it was so utterly devastating that it made me cry. Like I was weeping as I read this one sentence, and that book now will never ever be forgotten in my mind, in my imagination, in my experience as a human being, because he wrote that sentence so well, and he set the sentence up in such a brilliant way that it like literally destroyed me in that moment. And so after that, I always wondered, what would I miss if I didn't finish a book? Like, what is the piece of information? What is the beauty of a piece of writing, or something that I might have missed had I not finished it? And so that was like only by Allah's qadr that I had that experience, and it really kind of convinced me to carry on in that way.
Yeah, and on that point of so with this particular book, you had the situation where I'm sure there were obviously other things in that book that maybe you remember, but this particular thing.
Actually, really, I don't.
So it's just this one thing. That makes this question even more.
It's a very forgettable book.
What's your method behind, or how do you help yourself retain what you're reading?
So that's I think there's different styles of doing this, right? And so you should do your own research on the different styles that people employ to retaining information. Mine is particular to me because it helps me. What I do is that as I'm reading a book, when I get to the end of the chapter, so I have a pencil that I keep with me. At the end of the chapter, or wherever there's space, at the beginning or the end, wherever the space is, I will write 3 points that summarize what that chapter is about. And I'll do that for every chapter in the book until I finish. Then what I'll do is that 1 week later, I will go back to the book and I will revisit just my notes, nothing else. I'll just read my notes again. Then a month after that, I will read those again. 6 months after that again, and then perhaps a year later I'll do the same thing. It's not going to make me remember every line of the book, but what it does help me with, it helps me to retain the structure of a book, like what the topics of the book are about, where the key moments of a book are. I retain some degree of then familiarity with, you know, an outline or a plot line or characterizations or something, the things that appeal to me about the various chapters in the book. I have a sense vaguely of what it's about. It could, I mean, I don't know when that might become useful. It could become useful at some point. It's useful usually when I'm having discussions with people about various subjects that I'm interested in, whether it's work related or not even, and I'll be able to say, oh, such and such wrote in such and such book about this subject. You might find that interesting, or you might benefit from that. So that's where I find it useful. Like it allows my memory then to recall something that might be useful for me later. In terms of the specifics of each book, then I have a very, very different process, which I don't know if you want me to go into now, but it's a very convoluted one of kind of effectively getting the quotes that I like or need or find useful into a database, which then I can then access later. So yeah, that's a bit more of a complicated process.
That particular process has a lot more benefit with your sort of research area, though, right? In that
Right, that's right.
you basically, I think that's what you're referring to by the cataloging.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I can share a thing. I don't know if everyone can see the
I'm not actually sure how the streaming to YouTube works, but
all right, I see. Well, what I can do is I can put a link to something that they can then view later if
sure.
one of you wants to then share that
Yeah, inshallah,
with.
can do that. Yeah, okay. I think the admin will just share that onto the YouTube chat
Okay.
function, inshallah. Perfect. Um, so again, off of this sort of point of reading retention, I think a question usually comes up, and this is something that people maybe they don't even realize they're doing this, but ironically, within the whole scope of reading, they adopt again this sort of attitude of I just need to get through books. It's all about finishing and then starting the next one. So some of the questions that came up linked to this were, um, first and foremost, how do you choose what you're reading? And then, and even on that point, I don't know if you have some advice to share on that. Maybe it's okay to take your time with the book that you're reading, to digest what's going on, and reflect on that. It's not just a case of, get through this next one and the next one, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with that 100%. Look, this isn't a race for anybody. The part of the reason why I read so much is because I genuinely believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as part of my rizq, as part of the provision that he gave me, was the capacity to read a great deal, right? Not everybody necessarily has that. Maybe your capacity is to draw brilliant cartoons. That's rizq. That's a quality and it's a gift that's given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I don't have. And therefore I don't feel any obligation towards honing that skill in particular. And so, like, I don't want people to come away from this thinking, how can I read 100 books necessarily? If you are a reader and you're trying to improve your reading and you're trying to take your reading to another level, then this might apply to you, right? But if you're starting from point zero, if right now your reading is 1 book a year or 2 books a year, or maybe you're in school and the only books you read are the books that are set texts for you in your English class, right? And you're interested, okay, how can I get beyond that? Then I always say that, look, just start 15 minutes a day. 15 minutes a day gets you an average to slow reading speed. An average length book gets you 9 books a year, right? It's that simple. Now, what happens is that you read 15 minutes a day. Remember, the Prophet ﷺ told us that the deed that's most beloved to Allah is the one that's small but consistent, right? So again, we're thinking about our intention here, right? We're trying to connect it to an act of worship. So you're trying to improve yourself in some way for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so you dedicate yourself to this task, 15 minutes a day. So that's your goal, right? I have to do 15 minutes a day. What happens though, after a month of doing this is that maybe you get into month 2 and you hit your 15-minute mark, but the passage that you're on is so compelling that you read a little bit further. That day became half an hour, right? And maybe you don't do that again for another while, right? But then you'll find another passage that became 45 minutes. And so that 9 books that initially started out as being, if you maintain the 15 minutes a day, somehow ends up as 15 books in the year. Now, for the person who was at the point of 1 or 2 books in a year, 15 books in the year is astronomical in its difference. You know, even 9 books is astronomical in its difference. So don't take 100 books as the benchmark. That's not a benchmark for anything. You know, that's a benchmark for me because of how I have trained my life, okay, and what I privilege. Some of you, for example, will take a lot of benefit from your life in terms of the akhuwa that you have with one another. For you, like being part of a group that will do things together. Maybe you like encourage each other to do tahajjud, for example, or you'll get together and you'll memorize more Quran than I've ever memorized in my life, right? Or something, right? That socialization aspect will be very, very important to you. Okay, that is no less meaningful, right? Like that is meaningful in its own way. I do this because I feel like, okay, this is what I can do, and this is what I should be doing. I'm very bad at socializing. I don't meet up with brothers socially to like have dinner or whatever randomly. Every single dinner that I have with people and that are brothers, literally people find excuses that are work related for me to do this. Okay, so this is a failure on my side, an aspect that I'm not giving my due to my community in the way that I should. So my point is that there's always some kind of trade-off, right, that we make with these things in terms of trying to like specialize in some area or trying to improve ourselves in some way. You know, I prefer to give that time to my family because I take their rights away from them through my work, because I travel a lot for, you know, various cases that I'm working on. And so I hadn't have to reconfigure my life based on this travel that I do, based on my family's needs, based on the fact that I've got homeschooled children. And so we make these different assessments of our life based on the specific contingencies that we have, right? The specific necessitudes that we have. And so like, again, don't think of anything in terms of like, we don't use metrics as our way of thinking of success. We think of barakah, right? Like, is my niyyah correct? And do I believe that inshallah, if my niyyah is sound, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward me for this? Because if we're doing it for a different reason, if I start doing it for the likes on Instagram, right? And trust me, this is very, very easy for all of us to fall into. Like, really, I remember once I spoke to my colleague Muazzin Beg after I'd started doing TV interviews for the first time many years ago, like maybe about 15 years ago. I said to him, look, you know, how do you stop people from like praising you and you feeling happy with that praise? You know, how do you deal with kibr? He said, Asim, who told you that I deal with it? Right? Like, you know, and it was such a profound response for me, because like, this is Mazen Beg, this is a guy who survived Guantanamo Bay, right? Like, he survived torture, and you know, he's been through all of these things, and here he is admitting to me that the praise of people is something that he struggles with as well, right? And so we have to be aware of that. You have to hold yourself to account for that. You have to have other people in your life that will hold you to account for that as well. And mashallah, my wife's very good. You know, she always tells me that, you know, I'll hold you to account for these things. So, alhamdulillah, I have a good source of that in my life, right? And that's important. We're correcting our intention when we do any of these things. So even I felt a bit of like reticence about the way that the event was pitched, because it was just like, it's not that big a deal when you think about all the other areas of my life that I'm failing in, right? I should be memorizing much more Quran than I've memorized in my life, right? And so like that's a question. It's a concern. Maybe I don't give my family the rights that they deserve, like my wider family, like my aunts and my uncles. Again, that's a concern for me. We're making trade-offs all the time. So we have to correct our attention. Maybe somebody, literally, there might be a brother or a sister out there, and their entire thing, their whole life is that I'm going to do the best that I can and look after all of my family members for the rest of my life. That is no less than reading 100 books a year. I trust me when I say this. If that is your skill, that you show empathy towards other people and you show care and love, and just generally like decency towards others, there is no less. And so that's why, like, please, brothers and sisters, don't think about these things in terms of metrics. It really doesn't make a difference, because I could read 1,000 books in a year and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could stand me in front of him and say, you did it for yourself, you didn't do it for me, and it will be worthless, completely and utterly worthless. So really, if I can give you one piece of advice out of this evening, it's this, that it's just about niyyah, and I don't know if mine is correct, and it's something that I have to work on all the time. So just make dua for me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants me ikhlas in what I do, inshallah.
Inshallah. I think inshallah that is the quick fire reflection for our audience. Inshallah. We got there. Alhamdulillah. So I guess you can just correct me if I'm mistaken in my summary. But on that point, it is more a subjective thing. There's not a standardized sort of X number of books equates to success in this particular year. It's more because a couple of people will ask me a question around, I find myself busy with particular responsibilities. I can't give what I consider to be the right to reading, but it really is a case for the individual. Just putting that small effort in, and it might be the case for you that through that one book you read, you gain more than somebody who's read 50 books, 60
Absolutely.
books.
Absolutely, 100%. I can't agree with that more.
Alhamdulillah. Barakallahu feek. Question that's coming up time and time again still is, are there, however, any tips that you found along the way that help with, increasing attention span with the reading itself, maintaining focus?
I think that comes with practice, effectively. Like the more you read, the longer you'll read for. It's also a subject matter as well. There's no harm in putting a book away and saying, okay, fine, I'll come back to that book later, especially if it wasn't particularly doing it for you in that moment that you were in. Maybe the language was a little bit harder than you anticipated it to be. And so because of that, you weren't really enjoying the book. Maybe after you read another 100 books, your vocabulary will increase and you'll come back to it and find, this is actually a lot easier than when I first picked it up, and now a lot more enjoyable as a consequence of that. Look, there are some books that I read, and I struggle. Like, these are really hard, technical, philosophical works, and it takes me ages to get through them. And sometimes I have to put them away and just say, okay, fine, I'm gonna read something that's a little bit easier for now, because I just want to enjoy my reading for a bit, and I'm gonna come back to this. Okay. And it just happens like that. Like, for example, I've read a lot of Wa'il Halaq over the last couple of years. I mean, he's a monstrous writer. Like, really, nobody should write like this, but his ideas are very useful to me. I enjoy reading his books from the perspective of they make me think a great deal. But absolutely no human being should write like this. It's an abomination, to say the least. But it's still important, and so I have to persevere with it. And any fans of Wa'il Halaq or people who know me can tell him I said that quite happily.
But still, underlying tone, you still refuse to condemn the writing.
I won't condemn the writing, no. It is an abomination, but I won't condemn
it. There was an interesting question, actually, on the subject of writing reviews. So I guess this is somewhat linked to some of the early questions of, is there a particular reason why you do that? Does it help you retain? Does it actually help you, draw out your particular benefits?
No, I mean, I started writing reviews really to just share what I was reading. I felt like, okay, not everybody can necessarily read every single book that I'm reading, but perhaps they might benefit from some small reflection that I have. And I don't really do reviews as much as I kind of reflect on the books that I'm reading. And so usually there's something that I'm thinking about in my life, or there's some incident that happened in the past that I wanted to kind of bring out through the use of the book. So you'll see on and I mostly do this on Instagram, is that I'm just reflecting on what I'm reading then in a very, very short way. So it's just to kind of open up some of the content of these books to other people, really, um, to make them see whether or not they might be interested in picking those books up for themselves. So it's a very kind of small project. It's not, as people can see from my Bookslimist Instagram page, it's not exactly the most aesthetically pleasing for a platform that puts a lot of emphasis on aesthetics. Mine's literally just like an aerial shot on top of a carpet, and that's the extent of the effort that I put into the aesthetic side of things. But really, I'm just there to share books with people.
Mm. I wanted to ask you personally a particular question, but I'm struggling to frame it as a question. So if I just share like a point, maybe you can expand on it or disagree with it.
Yeah, of course.
It's actually something that I've gained from, actually took from you in the previous talk that you gave to us. But it's this idea that I think it's particularly relevant to us now, seeing as we are in this lockdown period. We're somewhat being forced into literal isolation to reflect on our own thoughts. One thing I took from when you were speaking to us last time was this idea that books really allow you to somewhat divorce yourself from your immediate reality and somewhat live through time. So, especially if you're reading things that are pre your period, pre your time. Could you just expand a bit on that, on the benefits of that actually happening and how it allows you to not become so narrow-minded and engrossed in your small reality?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I guess everybody has different experiences with books. When you get into a really good book, it literally transports you. Like, it's almost like your ruh leaves your body and it's placed somewhere else, and you are imagining and seeing things and are feeling excitement and adventure and dread and whatever in a way that you never could have conceived of it before. Like, I remember when I read The Exorcist for the first time, like I was genuinely like terrified as I was reading this book. Like, it really did one on me. I was very young as well. I probably shouldn't have been reading at that age, but like, and also Stephen King's It. I think I was 11 when I read It, and yeah, it's a terrifying book to read as a child. I would definitely wouldn't recommend it to 11-year-olds. But at the same time, right? It's that feeling of being absolutely lost within words. And so yeah, I mean, definitely as a form of almost escapism, of escaping this isolation. And of course, when you speak to prisoners will often tell you how books allow them to see beyond their bars. Like, it's almost like a cliche now with prisoners, but of course, you don't want to reduce their experience to a cliche, but they will tell you, like, reading allowed me to exist outside of the narrow confines of the space that I was in. It freed me. And so, especially in this time of isolation, it's such a great way of having escapism. I mean, I remember in one circumstance, there was a brother I know who literally does not read at all. His access to knowledge was based on Wikipedia and watching documentaries. And for a long time, I was trying to convince him, look, just read a book, just read a book. The one thing I knew about him for sure was that he really was a huge Liverpool FC fan, right? Like, massive for all of his sins, right? Like, this was something that he particularly enjoyed keeping in touch with. And so, I told him, well, why don't you start with some biographies on the history of your club? And he finished those books in no time whatsoever. I remember when I first got my younger brother into reading, he wasn't into fiction at all, but he was a huge cricket fan, and I got him the biography of Gary Sobers, who was West Indies cricket player, one of the greatest players of all time, and he absolutely loved it. Like, he read every single page of that book and just really devoured it very quickly. It's just sometimes you just need to find that that key that opens people up a little bit. There is a book out there for everyone. I'm convinced of that. There is always going to be somebody who just hasn't found the right book for them just yet.
Jazakallah khair. Unfortunately, it looks like we've hit 9 p.m. But alhamdulillah, I think this was This was powerful. Exactly for your time. It actually reminded me of a point that I read in translation of Mustafa Siba'i's book. So it's translated to English with the title "The Islamic Civilization." And there's a quote in there I just thought I'd share, if you don't mind. It's between an individual who was actually the individual and the Khalif. So the Khalif summoned somebody, and the person refused to attend because he was busy reading. So when he eventually came to the Khalif asked what was happening, and he essentially was describing books. I was reading books, and he described books, and I thought I'd share this quote. It's quite powerful, I think, particularly because of the situation we're in now with lockdown. So he says, describing books, they are companions whose talk does not bore you. Present or absent, they are constant and trustworthy. When we are in seclusion, their talk is very beneficial and helpful in taking away anxieties and worries. They benefit us with their knowledge of what has passed and with wisdom, affability, prudence, and sound opinion. You will neither have any apprehension nor fear of discourtesy, nor dread of any injury from their hand or their tongue. If I described them to be dead, I would not be a liar, and if I described them to be living, I would not be lying. I thought that
That's perfect. My family always say to me that your best friends are dead writers, and I think that's pretty well captured in that quote. Alhamdulillah.
I think that's a very apt way to finish for isolation. Find some friends in books, inshallah. No, are there any sort of final words that you want to share?
No, I think alhamdulillah, I think we covered everything. Jazakallah khair. Just obviously, do feel free to reach out to me if you want any further advice about your reading habits or anything. You can get to me on social media and whatever else. So do feel free to ask if you have any further questions.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. There's actually a couple of admin points just to wrap up, which are very relevant to what you just mentioned actually. So obviously for those joining us and to others will be watching this after, inshallah we're all somewhat inspired to start reading in whatever capacity that we can, but maybe we don't know where to start. So we've actually collated a short reading list, a reading syllabus to begin with, and it's linked with the hashtag Reading Challenge 2021, reading a minimum of 12 books, one for each month. So that's just putting a metric there as a start. But as we've said, or as Dr. Asim has kindly shared, don't define yourself by that metric. That's just a way to try and get into it, inshallah. So for everyone who signed up to the event, you'll automatically receive an email by the end of the week with a download link to the full syllabus. But if you want to get started with something using this link, you can see what we have already up. Inshallah, we have another event coming up on the 30th of January with Islamic Finance Guru. That's titled Get Rich or Die Trying. There'll be further explanation to that title as well during that session. It's not what it seems. And finally, check us out on social media to see the work that we do. And if you are considering supporting the work that we are doing, please visit myn.ac/support, and you can support us through our £1 initiative, inshallah. So yeah, Jazakumullah khair again, Dr. Asim, for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Jazakumullah khair, appreciate it.
Benefits a lot, inshallah. So this has been delivered to you again by MYN. I have been your host, Muhsin. Barakallahu feekum. Stay safe, inshallah. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.